I recently wrote about Once Upon a Time the Leafs traded Anton Stroman to the Calgary Flames, and I went through all of the fallout. The post began with, the Leafs probably shouldn't have traded Stroman in 2009. And it ended with, the Leafs basically helped build the current Chicago Blackhawks. So let's try that with a much bigger trade between the Edmonton Oilers and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it's a blast from the past too. We gotta go all the way back to September 19th, 1991. To give you an idea of how long ago that was, I'm pretty sure both Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews were -6 years old. The trade was, the Leafs acquired Grant Fuhr, Craig Berube, and Glenn Anderson from the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for Vincent Damphousse, Peter Ing, Luke Richardson, and Scott Thornton. Man, they just don't do trades like that anymore. 7 players, and look at some of the names on there. We're talking Hall of Famers. Oh, so Steve, you're gonna lecture us on who won the trade? No. What's noteworthy about this trade from September 19th, 1991 is that the butterfly effect didn't stop until 2009. Let's look at how this trade impacted the Oilers first. Damphousse was a great offensive acquisition for the Oilers, 89 points in 80 games, and what was at the time a career high of 38 goals. Problem was, it wasn't quite a match. Damphouse's career was going this way, the Oilers were going this way. They made it all the way to the 1992 conference final with Damphousse, but after they traded him, it was 4 straight years of missing the playoffs. So they traded the Montreal native to Montreal, who happened to have a guy named Patrick Waugh, and they were interested in taking a run at the cup. For Damphousse, the Oilers get Vladimir Vutek, I think that's how you pronounce it, you'll have to forgive me, I was 4 years old, Brent Gilchrist, and Shane Corson. Before we get too far away from it, let's go back to the original trade. Oilers barely used Peter Ing, they traded him to Detroit for a 7th round pick, turned into Chris Wickenheiser, never made the NHL. Luke Richardson actually stayed with the Oilers for 6 seasons and stuck around with his team for longer than anyone else involved in this trade on either side. Scott Thornton, however, he was traded to Montreal for Andrei Kovalenko, who was traded to Philadelphia for Alexander Daigle, who was traded to Tampa Bay for Alex Selivanov. So his tree ends there, but the Oilers side is not done. Remember our old buddy Vladdy Vutek? He was traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning along with a 3rd for Brant Myers and a 3rd. Myers was later traded to the Philadelphia Flyers in exchange for Jason Bowen, and we finally get to the conclusion of this trade web. We go back to the previous trade. That 3rd round pick that the Edmonton Oilers got, they picked Alex Henry with that, and he was Edmonton Oilers property until he was claimed off waivers by the Washington Capitals on October 24th, 2002. Crazy long, right? Well, with the Leafs, it's even longer. So let's look. Berube wasn't with the Leafs very long. He was traded to Calgary in the Doug Gilmour trade, which we're not even going to get into. That's an entirely other video. Glenn Anderson actually played 3 seasons with the Leafs until he was traded to the Rangers along with a 4th and Scott Malone in exchange for Mike Gardner, actually. Mr. Fastest Skater at the NHL All-Star Game until Dylan Larkin broke that record, and Connor McDavid inevitably breaks that too. Gardner was eventually traded to the Phoenix Coyotes in exchange for a 4th round pick. The Leafs selected Vladimir Antipov. Didn't work out in North America, but he had a very long career in Russia. Now the fun. Now the Leafs have a hot young goalie named Felix the Cat Potvin. He's got the saves, the gloves, the cool mask. He's even got a cool nickname. Who needs Grant Fuhr? Do you need a goalie? Anyone need a goalie? Ah, yes, Buffalo. The Leafs trade Grant Fuhr to the Buffalo Sabres along with a 5th round pick in exchange for Dave Anderchuk, Darren Pupa, yes, that is how you pronounce his name, and a 1st round pick that turned into Kenny Johnson. Now, Dave Anderchuk, you may remember as Dave Anderchuk! In the 31 games remaining in the season after the trade, Anderchuk scored 25 goals and 13 assists for 38 points. After 4 successful seasons with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Dave Anderchuk was traded to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for 2 draft picks. One of those draft picks, a 2nd rounder, was Marek Posmick. Posmick was eventually traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning along with Mike Johnson and a few other draft picks in exchange for a guy named Darcy Tucker, a 4th and a 5th, and the 5th turned out to be Kyle Wellwood. Tucker, as you know, was a feisty, kind of crazy, and goal-scoring fan favorite with the Toronto Maple Leafs for 8 seasons until he was bought out. We don't like to talk about it. Kyle Wellwood, who seemed like he had a lot of upside for a while, was a polarizing figure, let's say. And both of those players played their final games for the Leafs in 2008, but it does not end there. We got to go back up to the Anderchuk trade. Once again, the Leafs get a 1st round pick from the Buffalo Sabres. That turns into Kenny Johnson. The Leafs eventually traded Kenny Johnson to the New York Islanders along with a couple other players and a 1st round pick. Unfortunately for the Leafs, that 1st round pick turned out to be the 4th overall pick in 1997, and the Islanders used it to pick Roberto Luongo! This is so amazingly Leafs, because this started with a chain that led to like one of the best trades in Leafs history. But it includes the Leafs giving up the 4th overall pick, and it turns out to be Luongo. Why couldn't it be a bust? No, it's got to be one of the best goalies of the last 2 decades. decades, amazing 2-decade career so far. He's still going. He's playing with James Reimer, a former Leaf goalie too. Isn't that just perfect? I'm not done. I should mention that in that trade, the Leafs got Wendell Clark back, defenseman Matthew Schneider, and DJ Smith. Smith was eventually traded to the Washington Capitals for a 9th round pick, but it should be mentioned that the Leafs eventually got DJ Smith back. He's one of their current assistant coaches. Matthew Schneider was eventually traded to the New York Rangers in exchange for Alexander Karpovtsev and a 4th round pick. Karpovtsev was eventually traded to the Chicago Blackhawks in exchange for Brian McCabe. And Brian McCabe was eventually traded to the Florida Panthers along with a 4th round pick in exchange for Mike Van Ryn. Van Ryn was on the Leafs roster for 27 games during the 2008-2009 season, so we will go ahead and say this trade that began on September 19th, 1991 finally ended in 2009. Now, if you really want to split hairs, the 4th round pick that the Leafs gave the Florida Panthers in the Brian McCabe-Mike Van Ryn deal was a 2010 4th round pick, so you could argue that that was the end of the trade. If you include the initial Big 7-player trade between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Edmonton Oilers, this one trade is actually 20 trades. Again, the initial trade happened 6 years before McDavid or Matthews were born, and the chain didn't end until they were 12 years old. Okay, Matthews was like a couple months off from being 12. What do you think was the most interesting part of that trade? Let me know in the comment section, and hey, let me know if I forgot anything. That's it for this one until the next Blockbuster anyway. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Click subscribe if you really liked it. Tell all your friends, and man, how did anyone do stuff like this before Google?